Welcome to Council's Judgement, the brand new and premier competitive podcast for your favorite 1v1 singleton format, Canadian Highlander. My name's Tyler Woolley, and joining me today from the literal realm of Middle Earth is my co host, Spencer.
Hello.
Spencer, say hello. And from the birthplace of Canlander, we have our other co host, Sasha.
Howdy.
Well, boys, welcome to our inaugural first episode. How's everyone feeling today?
Oh, we're doing pretty good. Excited to get this shit show on the road.
Yeah, not too shabby. I recently flew back into Canada, but when we
Oh, that's true. Oh man, now we're that's a blooper.
sorry.
So just before we get into our kind of Karlov and deck discussion today, we thought we'd do a quick run through on why we're starting this podcast and what you can expect going forward from it. It's obviously an open concept and we're open to ideas, but Highlander's very near and dear to the three of us. We two of the three of us have been, or I guess all of us have been counselors. I'm just the most boomer counselor
Yeah, OG
of
council before there was
everyone,
voting.
OG counselor, and we want to see our format spread and thrive and continue to do well. So, firstly, me, Tyler Woolley, I was, as I said, an original council member back in the Stone Ages, have come in and out a few times due to being old and having children, but have recently started playing quite a bit again and really enjoying it. Just kind of looking to advance discussions and give people a way to listen and look into other metagames, find competitive deck lists, and have discussions with people that maybe are looking to get more content on the format itself. So you guys can go ahead and let everyone know what your boomer credentials are.
I'm Spencer, Deathwish Shaman on the Discord, which I recently become less boomery and started becoming more active on. Slinging spells since Tempest. Most of my competitive cred, I mean, I've tried to like do a bunch of circuits, but I used to play a bit competitively in the SCG circuit, playing Elves and Rogue Delver and D&T. Mostly plays top eights with Elves. That's my little friend, the Heritage Druid. But yeah, slinging Highlander since when Flametongue Cabu ruled the day, and Wild McCattle seems like an OP card.
Nice. And what about you, Sasha?
Well, I'm the boomer zoomer. I say that affectionately because I started playing Legacy when I was like 14 or 15 in our local scene, mostly by proxies, but then eventually in paper. So I have my playset of old Tarmogoyfs. I've been in Victoria that whole time, so I used to play Highlander on the side, and I've really returned to the format since we changed the proxy rules, which means even my Legacy collection can support a Highlander deck now. And it's been real fun. Got to become a counselor recently and continue to rack up wins.
I will say you stole my attempted steal of the counselor seat, so I'll just throw my salt in there.
All right. Well done. Well done.
I will say, so just in terms of my super boomer magic, I started playing in unlimited, and my very first booster pack was unlimited, and I got a Mahamodi Dijin, pretty sweet. I was a fairly competitive player in the early to mid 2010s, and have two Pro Tour top 50s for Grand Prix caches, I guess, like top, I think it was top 64 back then. I don't even remember. And have continued to like dabble in competitive play, going to like the now, but mostly retired from that now and will probably just be lander gaming for the rest of time.
And I will say, like, a big reason for us starting this podcast was to bring, frankly, a more competitive focus to the content out there. And, like, all of us have our background in competitive magic. That's how we entered the game, that's how we developed in the game. And now that we're Highlander gamers and in Florida Magic Zone, we still want to apply a lot of those skills. And seeing a lot of players come to the format for the first time from 100 card singleton formats like Commander and not having that same sort of background, we want to make sure that there's some sort of resource out there like this podcast for those players to both grow as competitive players, but also just grow in general in evaluating magic.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, especially looking to something that has like huge popularity like CEDH. You know, a lot of the skill sets can transfer over very easily. I think it's worth trying to put a product out there for people like that to pick up and look at and learn about the format and come out to these like fairly sweet events that are occurring in the Pacific Northwest a few times a year. All right, so for our initial episode here, um, we've got a new set on the horizon, Murders at Karlov Manor. I believe it releases next Friday. I know we've got pre-releases coming up this weekend. And so we thought it'd be a good time to just take a look at the set in general from a purely competitive Highlander lens. So we apologize if your really sweet card for your deck is not mentioned. We're more looking to focus on cards that will improve strategies that are already doing well or that we feel are one or two cards away from improving, or cards that could potentially spawn new archetypes. So
Don't worry, Sasha put enough pet cards into this list that if you're a casual, you'll feel well recognized.
So first off, we've got a couple of white cards, and kind of serving very different roles for the same mana cost here. So first off, we've got 10th District Hero. Spencer, what's your thoughts on this card?
Yeah, you know, 2 mana human 2/3. I think a lot of these kind of like D&T Maverick, white X decks are always looking for their good 2-drop, relevant creature type here. Collecting evidence becomes a 4/4. Collecting evidence again on its second ability, it becomes a 5/5 because your guys are indestructible. So that one's like pretty much like a slam dunk in terms of like if you can activate that. I think my problem with this card is actually collecting the evidence is like pretty tough in a creature deck, generally speaking. The first one a little bit difficult. The second one I think might be a bit tough to get. However, I still think it's definitely playable. I don't know how much we'll see it, but I'm definitely interested to kind of try it out for a while.
Nice. What about you, Sasha? What's your thoughts here?
I mean, I don't know if Spencer mentioned this, but it's also instant speed, which gives it a little bit more modality. This is not my kind of magic card, but I appreciate those people willing to sleeve it up.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, I think my thoughts on this card would be, I think, as Spencer kind of mentioned, the creature type very relevant. We've been close slash it's already playable in like a red white or red white X humans deck. So the more kind of human options that you get gives you just different options in different metagames for humans in particular. That's probably where I'd be most interested in it versus like a Death and Taxes or something. Spencer, I know you were jamming like red white Winota humans a few weeks back at least. So yeah, that I'm not super interested in it as like a white aggro card, like specifically, but in a deck where it's supported by um typal kind of support, I think it could be quite good.
Yeah, and like even like a lot of the Greymond like human mono white aggro builds too are definitely would like be looking for the 2-drop. So I think those ones are also like getting to the point where they have enough density of good cards. Now they can maybe drop like a Mopey card.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, the more cards you can drop that maybe aren't specifically supporting the human theme, and if even if this card is slightly worse, but is castable off Cavern of Souls, is pumped by Thalia's Lieutenant. Like the cards that you're playing anyway, but maybe you're not quite like all the way in on, it just can kind of further the synergies in your deck. All right, now we go to what I swear is the 19th iteration of this card, although probably not quite that high. We've got Doorkeeper Thrall. Spencer, why don't you lead us off on this
Just the white weenies coming at me. The fact that it's Flash makes it probably one of the more playable versions of this card, but I still don't. Most of the time in a lot of these D&T style or green aggressive decks, like your own creatures have ETB triggers that you're pretty much banking on. So maybe there's more of like a state-based one, more of like a collector Thalia kind of build. Perhaps that could go in there, or perhaps there's a different build for this. But I don't see this actually going in like a regular D&T deck because they rely on their ETB triggers too much.
one? Yeah,
I'm
that's a good point. What about you, Sasha?
highly suspect of this card. I'd be surprised if it sees play.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely leaning towards that. I just get very unexcited by cards with bad stats now. So especially in a deck like Death and Taxes, even like you need to be clocking people. You can't be like super dirtling unless that dirtle is like a literal door jammer that's like completely disrupting someone and with two toughness. And I don't know, this just doesn't super excite me in the metagames I've been seeing. But I'm sure as more cards get added, it could potentially be like, in people's maybe boards for down the line.
I mean, it's exclusive party at Karlov Manor, so invitation only. So maybe if it was more free for all, it'd be a 3-for-3-1 or something.
Yeah, exactly. Next, we've got a couple of Admiral Akbars of the set. Just cards that we're not really certain. We're certain people are going to be excited to put them in their decks, but we're not particularly feeling like they'll pan out to be long-term stays in your respective decks. Sasha, why don't you start us off talking about this elephant here, Unyielding Gatekeeper?
Yeah, so Gatekeeper is a 2 mana 3/2 that can be flipped up so you can morph it for 3 and then flip it up for 1 and a white. Flips up, you can exile another non-land permanent for as long as that thing's controlled. As long as you control the Gatekeeper, then it returns the battlefield tapped. This card, meh. I don't know the home for it. I think some people will delude themselves into thinking, oh, this is like a 2 mana 3/2 that I can put into my D&T deck, and it's kind of aggressive. It has like this modal thing that'll get value. I don't think it's worth it at all.
And Spencer, how do you feel about this Lonely Elefante?
It sucks. I think all more cards suck.
Yep, very. I like the succinct nature of this discussion. I think we're all in agreement here.
But
Now,
but Sasha, defend Aurelia's Vindicator to me.
all right, all right. So here's my sale for you. Uh, if you have made the mistake of sleeving up a Death and Taxes deck and you kept thinking, wow, I just want to go bigger. I just want to cast more Triumph of St. Catherine's. I want to put like big dum-dums into my deck. This is a card you might reach for. The decision process that leads you to this medium white deck, I would question the legitimacy of that. I think there are other archetypes that fit that shell better. I will note this thing's very difficult to race. The Ward 2 would be valuable if it didn't have 2 toughness on it. The fact that it's snagged by like every version of Shock makes it really unappealing. Um, and honestly, the disguise feature that turns it into this like X value Fiend Hunter, uh, yeah, that's flavor text if I'm being honest. You should probably be reading this card just as a 4 mana 4/2 with flying, lifelink, and warp 2.
So this is a special. This section of the podcast is just devoted to Spencer, our resident Martyr of Sands player, and so he's gonna guide us through some absolutely awful white cards and why they are playable in exactly one potential archetype.
Well, see, listeners, I'm not going to waste your time. If you like casting Martyr of Sands and you're one of those types of people, you know what we're talking. We're talking Case of the Uneaten Feast. We're talking about gaining life, having cards come back from the graveyard. We're talking about Delny triggering them multiple times. We're talking about Novice Inspector. You thought Thraben Inspector was a banger? How about another carbon copy? You can see me taking a giant thing of copium behind the dumpster as I scrub out and lose, get more store credit. Trying to play this pet deck once every month or two.
So I actually have a question only on Novice Inspector here. As someone who does not cast white cards that don't exile a creature or give me dungeon powers, is this not like playable in like artifact piles at all or anything, or it's just like not powerful enough?
Yeah, so I've tooled around with the artifact archetypes recently. I've played about every color combination that exists in terms of the artifact midrange shells. The Raven Inspector just never made the cut, and it never felt like a card that you really wanted to put in your deck. Like, the stats just weren't worth it. The fact the clue wasn't valuable enough, because it creates this awkward tension in the deck where you want to actually have a certain number of artifacts in play, and clues go in the opposite direction. You want to sack them. So, this card is not a valuable addition. I wasn't playing Thraben Inspector before, and I will still not play Novice Inspector.
Perfect. All right. Well, you heard it here first. Martyr of Sands, the only place to play terrible white cards. All right, our next trap card This one just reeks of Boomer. Is Intrude on the Mind. So we've got a 3 colorless, 2 blue instant. Reveal the top 5 cards of your library and separate them into 2 piles. An opponent chooses one of these piles. Put that pile in your hand and the other in the graveyard. Create a 0/0 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying, then put a 1/1 counter on it for each card put in your graveyard this way. So on the surface, this card looks very exciting to boomers, especially, who will say, I can't believe I get all that value. Better than Factor Fiction. The bad news is Factor Fiction has not been playable for about 8 years.
Yeah, Sauron's Ransom was the closest you're going to get to Factor Fiction in really rigorous competitive Highlander, and even that card's not going to auto-include. Say, set aside for certain archetypes that want that kind of effect, but you're certainly not willing to pay the extra mana for FOF, and you would throw up if you have to pay 5 for it with this card.
So next we've got we got some interesting ones here. I think we'll start with Forensic Gadgeteer.
Yeah.
2 and a blue. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, investigate. And activated abilities of artifacts you control cost 1 less to activate. Can't reduce it to less than 1 mana. And I think we're gonna have a Boomer Zoomer rant from Sasha on this one, so I'll let him take the floor.
This card sucks, and let me run you through why. To reach the kind of artifact density to make a reasonable mid-range artifact deck in our format, you end up having to get your artifacts from a lot of different sources. A lot of token generation through things like the Halflings, Urza's Saga, even the Retrofitter Foundry, where you'll get 1 cast out of it, as well as your artifact lands. What that all coalesces in is the actual density of castable artifacts is super, super low. And this is a card that you don't just need to trigger it 1 time to get value from that cast trigger. You need to trigger it like minimum twice, probably 3 times to really extract value. So this is a card that will fool you into thinking it's playable while still not being. There is more applications for this in an eggs-based deck, something that does actually have a natural density of those castable artifacts. And that's a deck that does also want to draw cards and I guess could use KCI to draw food or to churn through food more efficiently. It's also a deck where playing just a 3 mana creature that's a 2/3 is super silly. Like, one of your biggest benefits to playing this asymmetric combo deck is you've blanked a huge percentage of your opponent's deck because all the removal is useless. And playing this card that makes the removal live again just is not beneficial. If it had like a more natural combo application, if you played it and knew you were going to combo instantly in your bad eggs combo deck, cool. Maybe it would be good. This card does not do that. It's just off the table entirely.
Yeah, that's fair. As it's a blue card, I don't even think we need Spencer's opinion, to be honest, because we know he won't be casting this anytime soon. But if you've got anything to add, Spencer, feel free.
No, I feel like I've had a crime and we should reenact it on me.
Oh, I guess we know who's the terrible pun dad of the podcast. Next, we've got Reenact the Crime, a great lead in there by Spencer. We got triple blue 1 instant. Exile target non-land card in a graveyard that was put there from anywhere this turn. Copy it and cast the copy without paying its mana cost. This is an interesting card. It has a lot of text in terms of just interesting things maybe you haven't seen before. What do you think, Spencer, kind of its biggest potential implications in the format?
I mean, like, I think it has a lot of reanimator implication. I mean, currently they're not super blue heavy, most of those builds, but there could be definitely ones that maybe lean a little more blue. You could be flipping over a bigger baddie than Archon if you're going to do something like this. You could also have, like, obviously, like, Omniscience and, like, Emrakul at the very top end. I think it has a couple cool tricks where, you know, if your opponent is also doing some sort of dredge nonsense or filling their graveyard, you can get cards from them as well. But yeah, I think there's, like, definitely, like, some sort of delve or reanimator implication here.
Yeah. I also just want to jump in and say, like, this is another card that fits into this weird category of slower 2-card combos where they exist out there naturally, they're unpointed, and there may be some reasons to reach for those kinds of more expensive combos. And this fits very solidly in that archetype because combos naturally with Entomb, just putting an Emrakul into play, casting Enter the Infinite. This kind of like hybrid Omnitel style deck, you could build around. Whether or not the juice is worth a squeeze, that's another question. But it's another card for that home of like humble obedience, rest in peace combos that are not 7 points, They're definitely more expensive, but you can still reach for them, and this is another card to that list.
Yeah, I think that's honestly the first thing I thought of would be, is this a card that can make like a mono blue combo possible? And so something where, like you were saying, like, can you get like some sort of omniscience pile with a way to discard it or whatever? But like, just is there a way to take some of the advantages to being mono blue, running like a super wide blue spread, and having like combo finishes available to you is something that piques my interest for sure. But whether or not it's good enough, we won't know. But I will definitely be giving it a shot. I'm quite excited by this card. Next and finally, we've got Stoneforge. Oh no, sorry, wait. Cryptic Coat, the Stoneforge Mystic Protege. Two and a blue equipment. When Cryptic Coat enters the battlefield, cloak the top card of your library, then attach Cryptic Coat to it. To cloak a card, put it onto the battlefield face down as a 2/2 creature with Ward 2. Turn it face up for its mana cost if it's a creature card. An equipped creature gets +1/+0 and can't be blocked, and you can tap colorless and a blue to return it to its owner's hand. I'm gonna go to Sasha here first because I think this card could be right up his alley, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, this card, if you transported me back to like 15-year-old Sasha playing Jund versus Stoneforge Mirrors, I would despise fighting this so much. About a decade's passed from there, and I'm genuinely not sure how good this card is in modern day Magic. It has the potential to develop a lot of value. On an empty board state, it's obviously great being able to recursively cloak the top of your deck and getting this unblockable thing. I'm not sure what the home for this thing is. It's definitely a nice Stoneforge package, but I'm not sure the deck that wants to play Stoneforge and Cryptic Coat and is gonna naturally progress to that sort of board state where it turns out value.
Yeah, that's fair. Just before we go to Spencer, so is there any world where this is playable in the more like academy style bots aggro decks that you've been playing, or probably not?
I will say, for the more aggro-centric artifact shells, I think this is a great card for those. I tend to think that those shells are among the weakest of the artifact variants. But you're right in saying that this is a good card for that. It definitely doesn't turn the needle at all, and one of the big strengths of those decks tends to be the fact that they're more resilient to these kinds of control shells. This is another card that fits into that category. I don't think it makes them more playable substantively, but it's a nice addition to specifically those kinds of aggro cards or aggro artifact decks. You're right.
Nice. What do you think, Spencer? Does it have any implications we're missing, maybe?
I think yeah, covered it. I think it's a nice Stoneforge Mystic package card, and I think it could definitely play a role within like the blue-white Stoneforge decks that maybe aren't necessarily just there or just get green. You know, maybe just straight blue-white. Maybe add some other like avenue for them to attack. I don't know, seems fine.
So I will say the one, and I'm gonna blank on the name, so maybe you guys can help me out. But the jellyfish equipment that's like he's playing hammer sometimes.
Reality chip.
Yeah, reality chip. I think I kind of like this card better than reality chip. I don't
I'm
know,
with you.
maybe I'm crazy, but I do think I think it'll have a home. I like this card. I think it's playable but not overly exciting.
I definitely think it's better than reality chip. It has cleared that low bar, 100%.
Yeah, I think the other thing about this card too is like, unlike when you think of like Cauldron or even Batterskull is a bit more mid, but like this one you like draw it without the Stoneforge Mystic, and it doesn't seem like awful. Whereas like
Yeah.
you draw Cauldron and you're just sitting there being like, oh god, you know. So I think that's kind of like maybe one thing going for it. Like I'm not saying playing a 3 mana like 3/2 unblockable with Ward 2 is like that great, but it's like not the worst either. It's kind of a resourceful thing of card advantage.
Yeah, and like who knows, you could even flip up your Stoneforge Mystic.
Oh, the dream. Speaking of
Uh,
dreams,
yeah, speaking of horrors and dreams, we've got the real low bar of potential playable black cards from this set, starting with Hunted Bone Brute. Two and a black for a 6/2 menace. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent creates two 1/1 white dog creature tokens. When it dies, each opponent loses 3 life, and it has Disguise of 1 and a black. And I think Spencer might have made a mistake putting this card on here because I think he meant to put it on the commander playables, and he accidentally put it on the competitive Highlander playables. But I'll let him defend himself here.
I just thought Crypt Mana, I thought Routing Register, and I just thought this is the kind of card that I don't think is very good, but that I will lose to in someone playing like a medium red or a red black kind of style deck, where they're just kind of like pumping out big dum dums on turn 1 or 2.
Yeah, like I think just having 2 toughness is just so brutal for a card like this. Like as the premier Rotting Regisaur pilot of the format, I will say that having 6 toughness is kind of the draw to playing that card. But as we discussed with the Angel earlier, like, and this obviously doesn't even have ward, but like it just literally dies to everything and leaves behind blockers. It just I don't get the appeal.
No, I think it's pretty trash. Sasha.
I don't care for it. Throw it out. Don't play this card.
And next we have Case of the Stashed Skeleton. I just assume this card's terrible, but Spencer assures me that maybe it's playable.
You know,
So
when it comes to black, this set, I had to dig deep. People were telling me this is going to be another demonic tutor. This maybe could make Sandy B playable. I was getting people coming at me from all angles.
oh
It's really,
man,
it's really not good. I have to say, I don't think it's very good.
so we've got to do we blame the Discord for this being
No,
on the
no,
slide, or what's going on here?
local community.
Oh, even worse. All right.
I will throw one small bone to this card. Like this
Bone
Ooh.
skeleton.
Yeah, like cool. You have your 2 mana card that makes a 2/1 skeleton with menace and can't block. And it then turns into a demonic tutor at some point down the line. I struggle to see the deck that wants to play this. Like maybe if you've again made the mistake of registering mono black aggro, this is a card that you can consider. Maybe you make the mistake of including it. And if you're in that kind of deck and there's something like you have some way to actually really mobilize that demonic tutor in the late game, which that deck conventionally does not have access to, uh, like that's the only application I can imagine for this. And even that plan doesn't really exist.
I mean, I think if you're in the market for profane tutor, you're probably like in the market for this card.
No, no, no. Hard to disagree.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. 2 mana now, 2 mana the next turn. There's other people play all sorts of bad tutors.
No, yeah, no. As someone who's cast a lot of profane tutors this year, I am not on board with this comparison.
All right.
I will say, like, if you're a red black deck and this is the card that you're putting into your aggro deck that can eventually find your price of progress, I think that's probably its best application. And outside of that, I struggle to see why you'd include this.
All right. Well, another more heavy hitters from black.
Yeah, we're gonna wish black a long goodbye here, I think. I struggle to see how either of these are ever getting registered in a deck, to be honest. But as you said, we're really digging for scraps here with potential playables. Um, Long goodbye if you're really looking to upgrade that eliminate. It is an improvement over that, but I would definitely urge you to play literally anything else. Um, I don't know if you guys want to expand on that at all, but I feel that's pretty much it.
Yeah, like I think if you're playing mono black and you don't have access to other colors, that's the context that you would reach for eliminate. Probably still not amazing, but that's the realm that you end up in. The one spot I can imagine wanting to register long goodbye. For almost any other color combination, there are just better things you can reach for. And you should just cut that eliminate, not for the strictly better eliminate, you should cut it for a strictly better card, period.
Yeah. Spencer, any thoughts, or do you want to just lead us into our snarling gorehound conversation and explain why that has entered my eyes here?
All right. Just because I put together the Google slide, but I'm responsible for all the card choices on here. Starling Gorehound, I think anytime you look at a card that has an ETB that does some sort of dredging or like surveil or something like it just needs to be like examined from like a well, what's the infinite loops with this?
Yeah,
I'm not saying like Sterling Goran is gonna like change an archetype or anything like that, but I'm just saying it's a card that put like a little note on in like a box of, hey, maybe this comes out of the box one day. There's lots of infinite creature combos in our format. Some of them don't necessarily always like kill the turn they do that. Maybe this is like a way to spin your entire deck, which some decks are aiming to do. So yeah, I
yeah,
mean,
I will.
not good, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's from the lens of like currently competitive lists, it's probably not doing much, but I think you're right in that there's if you're playing graveyard based, if you're playing like, Narcomoeba and dredge cards and anything like that, like it does some interesting things potentially in those shells. It's just those shells are more on the lines of like fun decks versus competitive decks as it stands.
Yeah, like how every single house has that box of cables with a bunch of adapters, and you're not 100% sure what they do, but you still hold on to it with the knowledge that, oh, maybe this will be useful at some point. Starling Gorehound is that thing stuck in your closet. Like you're holding on to it. We both know that it's not going to be useful. We both know that technology will evolve in the time that it could be. Um, but it's still there. It's still something that's going to be stuck in your house, and that's the best I have for this.
Yeah, I love it. Great, great comparison.
Sorry, Black, you're trash.
So red actually has some bangers, to be honest. I like a couple of these cards quite a bit, and they fit into some of the decks I've enjoyed playing this year. We're going to start with Fugitive Codebreaker. One in a red for a 2/1 with prowess and haste. Already playable in my eyes, right there. It has Disguise 6, 5 and 1 red, and it's reduced by 1 for each instant and sorcery in your graveyard. And so when it's turned face up, discard your hand and draw 3 cards. Uh, yeah, I'm really liking this card. I'll let Sasha start with what he thinks of it here.
Yeah, like I've been really excited to frankly improve on the mono red deck in our format, and this is a card that pushes that sort of direction into this more of a prowess shell. This is an efficient card that does this. It does a good job refueling your hand after you spent all your resources. It plays to just emptying your hand through its disguise cost reduction. It's also just like an okay body if you don't play it as a morph card with Ward. Like 2 mana, 2/1 with haste and prowess was already playable for the mono red deck, and like the fact it has this quite good alternate mode is fantastic. This is a card I'm actually excited to cast.
Yeah, what about you, Spencer?
I think it's pretty medium. I think like there's like definitely prowess shells. I always think of like a look at like Kenra Spellseer as like everyone kind of seems pretty hard for that card, and it's okay. And I think on the space value, this is like an okay card. I think it's better than like Charming Scoundrel and some of the other weird 2 drops that some of like the more medium red decks play. I think like the more spell heavy medium red decks or like a blue red or some sort of blitz style deck definitely could benefit from something like this. I think to get like full use of the disguise, I'm gonna reiterate once again, like more cards just so rarely work out. But having said that, it's nice to have like a couple mana sinks in the deck that you can draw late game and be like, oh, I guess I could actually like maybe get a benefit from this when you're both sort of hell bent, as we've seen with cards like Lorraine Revealed and things like that, as you draw them late game and you actually get the full value when you have the mana.
Yeah, like I think there's two applications for this card. I think the first one is just as kind of Sasha pointed out, it's a good burn card in my opinion, and I'm not by no means am I a master of that archetype. But just any kind of mono red shell, I think it's an improvement over a lot of the 2 drops people are playing.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that, as I've been working on blue red X prowess, uh, some like berserk or teamer battle rage kind of style decks, and just haven't quite gotten the right shell together. And I think that's probably why this card excites me, as I do think it's a pretty good get. A deck that's casting Ponder and also being aggressive. So next, We're going to go to Connecting the Dots, 1 and a red enchantment. Whenever a creature you control attacks, exile a top card of your library face down. You can then tap 1 and a red to discard your hand and sacrifice Connecting the Dots to put all cards exiled with it into their owner's hands. I'm interested, Spencer, what your thoughts on this one are. I think it has some interesting applications, but I'm not 100% sure how I feel about it.
I think connecting dots could. I mean, we've all seen kind of like the effect like Bone Courier and other sort of like even like the Ren's Resolve and Fatal Mirror Breaker kind of effects have had on like the red archetype as it's kind of done a bit of a pivot from both like the big red versions and like the small low the ground versions to being these ones that actually have like significant sources of card advantage. So I think anytime you can have something that has like a late game like buyout for the red decks where they just really want to draw like 3 or 4 cards, and that can usually be quite game ending for them. I don't know if this one will hit the cake as much as the next one. I'm still trying to connect the dots on whether or not it's going to be playable.
Yeah, like I definitely think this is a mono red card that I mean we're talking about prowess being the application for the code breaker. This is the card that fits into your like Sly mono red deck, the one that's trying to play every single 1 mana 2/1 and just wants to empty its hand as fast as possible. It might play even like green to suit up things with Rancor. It might play like dumb red enchantments just to like hammer hand to stop things from blocking. This is the kind of card you'd put in that deck. Outside of that specific subversion of mono red, I'm not 100% sure it's the best.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I think you don't see a lot of like all in red anymore for the most part. Greg, a local player, does play like all 1 drops and some 2 drops mono red and has had quite a bit of success with it. But even that, like that's more of like a spell slinger deck, like more I don't know. I don't know that this would go in a deck like that, but I think there's definitely builds of mono red where this is like a very standout card. It's just whether those versions of mono red are actually worth playing over the other options.
100%.
Yeah, good point.
Lastly, we have Case of the Crimson Pulse, a 2 and a red enchantment. When this case enters the battlefield, discard a card, then draw 2 cards. To solve, you have no cards in hand. If unsolved, solve at the beginning of your end step. And once solved at the beginning of your upkeep, discard your hand and draw 2 cards. So this is continuing in the recent, kind of as Spencer pointed out, just really pushing these kind of effects in red, and this is kind of the next in line here. I'd like to know kind of where you would see this card. I'm going to just start with Spencer again, just because he kind of led us into this card previously.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at like the more kind of, I guess, national or international metas, really noticing like medium red is kind of taken over from red deck wins or sly red as like the de facto like dominant red archetype. And a lot of the, I think that once again, I think a lot of the success of that is like the cards like Ren's Resolve et al. And this one, although not quite Fabled Mirror Breaker, definitely is like a pretty good reload. You know, you're looking at like immediately drawing 2 cards, then next turn you're gonna like recurringly have these 2 cards. Enchantments are extremely difficult to deal with within the format as a whole. This adds like another enchantment to your kind of like almost like must answer enchantment along with like Blood Moon and Fable. So like red having more access to more of these difficult to interact with permanents. And yeah, I think this really slots into like the medium red game plan, which is like play a couple like low 1 drops with some burn, and then you're filling that 3 to 4 slot with like either card draw or like hasty haymakers. And I think that is going to further cement like the red deck is like kind of like also a pretty huge like card advantage deck that can go toe to toe with blue.
Yeah, this card
Nice.
is the fact that this card kind of acts like a season pyro, where if you were completely hellbent to cast this card, you just straight up draw 2 is fantastic. If you ever get to solve this thing, it's just such a nightmare to deal with. Like having a red deck that's going to be drawing 3 cards every single turn opposed to 1, like I struggle to see the mid range deck that can outvalue this. And this is like generally speaking, as somebody who plays a lot of 4 color mid range and feels perpetually like I'm favored against mono red, this is a card that I'm actually really scared to face, and so that's why I think it's an excellent addition, not just to like the sub categories of mono red, probably just every mono red deck.
Yeah, I think like I'm actually super into just kind of looking at the cards we've looked at in red, where like these cards are very archetype specific versus a lot of the red cards. that have just been, like Fable, Unholy Heat, Ragavan, like these like they're red cards, but they're like 4 color cards, like they're going in the good stuff decks versus these are very strong red cards that feel like red cards. They're, going in mono red or mono red light splash kind of decks. And yeah, I'm very very into looking at the implications these cards might have on those type of decks that are already like pretty big players in the metagame. Yeah, we have a second special page of red cards. We're just going to talk about a couple of goblins here, and especially goblins has had a nice resurgence in the local metagame at least. I know Tim McInnes had 2 or 3 wins last year playing exclusively goblins, and looks like he's already got 2 this year from what I'm seeing. So we're going to talk about 2 goblins. The first being Crime Novelist, 2 and a red for a 1/3. And whenever you sacrifice an artifact, put a 1/1 counter on Crime Novelist and add red to your mana pool. So I don't know if this is really a goblin by anything other than name in terms of our format. But what do you think the applications are here, Spencer?
If in a combo, especially with like animation module, Goblin Bombardment. I mean, Goblin Bombardment's already a card that they play in that deck. I don't necessarily think that it's like a shoe-in. Obviously, it's also Crypt Mana, which I think is relevant every time we see another Goblin. If they're Crypt Mana, I think that actually ups the power level of the deck. It's supposed to be them being 1 RR. But there's something said for like even like Kiki Chiki piles. Every creature deck in the format that attacks you with creatures, but then has a combo backup is infinitely stronger than the ones that are just like a fair creature deck generally, particularly like a lot of race situations, and it allows them to win a lot of mid-range stalls, and also like compete with the fast combo decks sometimes. So although I don't think this is a good combo necessarily, sometimes I think if you're in the pocket, there's probably another card besides Animation Module that's playable that easily combos with it. But most Goblin decks play Goblin Bombardment already, so yeah, I think that's why I thought that.
Nice.
I think
What
I
about,
think this
what about you, Sasha?
I think this is a card that 60 card players are gonna wildly over evaluate, and commander players will probably think it's more fringe, ironically. Like the kind of deck that actually makes use of this, frankly, very powerful effect of whenever you sack an artifact, make a red mana, the ++1 counters flavor. That's really like gonna be most effective in a deck that has 4 of copies in 60 card formats. And we just don't have the density of, frankly, eggs to make that abusable in the same sort of way. It's also rough that like for the animation module sack outlet combo, you need to include like not just Crime Novelist is a bad card, but animation module is a bad card plus a sack outlet. And like the Goblins deck already has access to the different kinds of Goblin recruiter piles. I don't think this adds to that in a substantive way. Uh, Maybe if we get some like again, this is the thing going in that box of chords, where like maybe if we end up in a spot in like 2 or 3 years where now artifact sub theme goblins is a thing, this is a card that can come out of that box of chords. But until then, I don't see it.
Yeah, I mean, like I think the box score thing's really relevant. I think this card more than the other cards, like trash cards we were talking about earlier. Like this is definitely one where I could be like, oh, maybe in a bunch of years it's playable. Because I mean, people kind of felt that way about humans, and now like most of the D&T decks have a human sub theme. Like they're playing Greymond, and Greymond is like a big haymaker on 4 now. Winota piles are like can be quite gambly, but also quite powerful. So it's like eventually sometimes there's like a density. And although I used to think that they were gonna hesitate to print low CMC good artifacts, that doesn't really necessarily seem to be the case. As we get more and more like those artifacts, maybe there's a transition or a pivot where medium red and goblins can have a bit of a blend, and it's not just like one or the other.
Yeah, I think this card's very interesting. I put together like a Jund Goblins list in the summer last year that was like kind of more like old school combo goblins with like fecundity
Mm.
and all the like sack outlets and stuff, and this card would have like fit like a glove in there. So it'll be interesting to see if this does kind of prop a more combo-y version of goblins to the forefront. And but yeah,
Yeah,
we'll see
yeah.
what happens.
I will also just note, like in the artifact, not to harp on this, but the artifact mid-range subspace, I think there's kind of 2 families of those kinds of mid-range decks. There's the Bant shells that incorporate cards like Wargate, Sylvan Scrying Crop Rotation to be really good at putting Urzasaga into play. There's the like other family, which is built around welder cards, built around
Yeah.
these kinds of like Grixis white shells that play things like Oni Cult Anvil, want to like nickel and dime, like chip shot your opponent with damage over time, and then accrue this value, use Oddball Fiddlebender to do that, generate infinite value, spin your wheels, and then win. And I think people who like that style of deck will be drawn to Crime Novelist. Uh, I think that that archetype and this card kind of exemplify the problem with that deck, where you're spinning your wheels a lot, but you're not actually accomplishing very much. And the work that needs to go into Crime Novelist to make it compete against like the competitively costed green creatures, especially aggressive green creatures in the format, is just so much. So I don't think it's very good in those shells.
Yeah, it's a card to keep your eye on for sure. Like if
Mhm.
you're I think if you're an artifact mid-range player and a goblins player, you're gonna want to buy one of these to keep in a box for a couple of years or something, as a potential. But I think you're right that it's probably overall not quite there yet. Lastly, we've got Krenko, Baron of Tin Street, which I guess they're just gonna print some sort of variation of Tin Street and Krenko in like every second set now. I don't know. So it's a two and a red for a 3/3 haster. Tap, sacrifice an artifact, put a 1/1 creature or counter on each goblin you control. And whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may pay red. If you do, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token. It gains haste until end of turn. I think this is interesting. I think there's applications for it. I just don't know that the straight goblin deck is really the applications. What do you think, Spencer?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything we said about Crime Novel is kind of applicable to Krenko. To me, they're kind of like a little bit similar, except Krenko is a bit more of like to be played in more of a medium artifact kind of Goblins deck. You know, if you're playing mana vaults and mana crypts and stuff like that, I feel like this gets a little more value. But yeah, it's just these are the box of chords kind of cards. I don't really think they're playable. Like, right, I don't think these are like slam into any existing deck right now. But these are ones that I definitely like. I'm probably gonna buy and put them in my like goblins pile in like my box and maybe come at it like in a year or two.
I think that's like a good like these are I think these are obviously going in the same deck. You know, if there's a if there's a goblins deck that can somehow also play like shrapnel blast and galvanic blast or something where there's enough of a density of cards like that, these are all of a sudden great, but we're just probably not there yet, right, Sasha?
Yeah, if Goblin Welder and Goblin Engineer begin having relevant pipelines, these are cards that you're going to be interested in. And the very fact that like printed both of these kind of indicates potentially a shift in the sorts of Goblin cards we may see. So who
Yeah.
knows? Given a year or two, maybe Artifact Goblins is a nice thing. But yeah, until then, you probably should be registering these cards.
Next, we got the green cards. Couple of very interesting ones here. Firstly, talk about Archdruid's Charm. Nice ode to Archmage's Charm from Modern Horizons. We've got triple green, and then we've got choose one, search your library for a creature or land, and reveal it. Put it onto the battlefield tapped if it's a land card. Otherwise, put it into your hand and shuffle. Put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. It deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. And exile target artifact or enchantment. I know I am very interested in this card in a number of decks that I've played in the last 6 months or so. What do you think here, Sasha?
I think this, if you're a deck that can put green, green, green into your mana pool and you're doing that consistently, this is such a good card. Like, the fact that it slots so well into Cradle decks, being able to tutor up Cradle itself,
Yeah,
it can go in like Spellseeker decks that can support triple green to put that into play. It also just has like the two other modes are really good. Like, the Exile Artifact and Enchantment means that you can hose things like Underworld Breach combo and Time Vault, and the like bite effect to deal damage is going to be way more relevant than you think. Like, of all the cards in the set, this is like to me the most slam dunk a staple. It's just the decks that it's a staple in are relatively narrow.
totally. What do you think, Spencer? I know this card's got to be good for a lot of the decks you've played.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big time Gaia's Cradle enjoyer myself. So I was pretty excited for printing this card. I'm excited for the rest of the cycle actually too. I think they're all been pretty good. This one, I think Cradle, slam it in. The lands players are kind of like thinking it's good, but I don't think most of those. I think the triple green pip's a little hard and maybe it's a little bit slow. But if you're trying to get a Cradle, most Cradle decks also are low on removal and are soft to like artifact enchant combo kind of hate. So this kind of is a card that kind of slams in. And honestly, I think it's probably one of the standout cards of the set that I think is actually like a staple card that I'm like, oh, this is actually good. Like whereas like someone's like, oh, maybe this card goes in archetype, or oh, this one's okay. This one I'm actually like in the archetypes it goes in. This is actually like very good.
Yeah, I think like honestly for me, I I think I would put this in pretty much every single deck that can cast it. Kind of like Sasha was saying. Like and even like leaning like if I'd be hard pressed to like not play this in like Gruul monsters.
Mm.
And I that like I think anything that has Gaia's Cradle in it, I'm probably including this and at least trying it to see if I can reliably cast it. Just having huge like it's just such a wide spread of abilities to have. Like it's basically a combo tutor, a removal spell, and a way to get rid of two of the like hardest to interact with permanent types for most decks. Just make it like such a flexible card for obviously an inflexible mana cost, but it's the best color to have inflexible mana in. So I
Yeah,
think this
yeah,
is like an absolute slam dunk card.
totally. And one other little thing about it is that like triple green pip, I think like when you're talking about some like the existing cradle archetypes do like easily support this. Like I mean you should be able to be casting this on like turn two and EOT.
Yeah, I mean I know I played like a Naya hoof deck for 3 weeks, kind of I think in like November, December. I played Llanowar Tribe and like I had Plateau in my deck and had no trouble casting this card. Like it was obviously a base green like double splash kind of thing, but like I think I think this card's tremendous.
Definitely ups the power level of those decks for sure.
All right, next we've got Analyze the Pollen, a single green mana for a sorcery, and as an additional cost to cast the spell, you may collect evidence 8. Search your library for a basic land card, but if evidence was collected, instead search your library for a creature or land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. I think a lot of players are going to think this card is a slam dunk, like auto include, and I'm not quite there yet because 8 is a very, very large number. But Spencer, where do you land on the pollen?
I think it's playable in certain archetypes. I'd say it's definitely more like the bug or like four color loam style decks, the ones that are playing like more of a counter suite as opposed to like just necessarily just dredging solid. I do think that evidence eight is actually easier to get in the decks that are kind of like milling themselves with like thought scours and stuff than delirium. So I think this one's like an upgrade over that card. So if you're in the realm of thinking that the delirium one for 1 mana is playable, then like this one I think theoretically is a bit better.
Yeah, like when you compare this to Traverse the Ulvenwald, it's quite favorable. But that card has like been awkward forever. So
I mean, with all
Y-
the Lorien revealed and like the Troll Khazad generous end, I think like you can turn this card on pretty easily.
Yeah, I think it's definitely like I'm not certain Traverse is like playable at this point in time for the most part, whereas this is definitely playable, and I think it's playable in some like pretty cool shells potentially. Like I'm just thinking like some like survival shells where you're having the land cyclers, and this is like another way to tutor for combo pieces. That's obviously going to be unpointed. So I think it's interesting and definitely playable, but it's definitely you have to consider the deck that you're putting in. You're not putting this in like Naya aggro to tutor for questing beast or
yeah, I also
something. Like, yeah, go ahead, Sasha.
yeah, I also think this is a card people will misevaluate and think it slots really well into Seeker Walk, honestly. Thinking, oh, I'm just gonna play this one mana tutor for Seeker, and that's fantastic. I can effectively like Green Sun Zenith for like specifically Seeker. And I think those people are just gonna not recognize how big Collect Evidence 8 is in that deck, and
Yeah,
they'll include it, think it's bad, and then shove it away. And I think it does fit into some other archetypes, just specifically not that one.
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think, and maybe it inspires like some sort of hybrid decks where you're casting Seeker but you're also cycling away Generous Ent or Troll or whatever, like you can get a free tutor, but you have to build your deck to kind of consider it at the same time.
Yeah, if you build your Seeker Walk deck in a unconventional way, this is the kind of card that would fit into that sub build.
We're trying to talk about competitive podcasts and we're doing ourselves a disservice.
Yeah, no.
I don't know. I think there's like a bug list, like Spencer was saying. I think that card is gonna help a potentially very good deck. Next, we've got Axebane Ferox, 2 and 2 green for a 4/4 Death Touch haste and Ward of Collect Evidence 4. In the long line of Mana Crypt 4 drops here. Not sure this lands in the top 10 of me personally, but Spencer, where are you landing on the Ferox?
In like some of the Gruul Stompy decks, maybe like Big Green Stompy or Celestia Stompy, I think, these sorts of cards that have haste and any sort of like intrinsic value, like are big, like always going to be evaluated. I mean, Questing Beast, this is not. On the same way we're saying collect evidence can be kind of more difficult than necessarily like it seems on the surface. This is definitely a card that I think is actually a little bit harder to kill than it looks. Yeah, I don't think this is like 4 drop slot in those decks like 1 through 5. But when you're looking at like the last few slots in like a go big medium deck, I think this is something that maybe is worth trying out. Particularly, I think if you have a really like white removal based meta or black removal based meta, then the fact that this has a ward definitely would like weigh into my decision a little bit.
Totally.
Yeah.
What do you think, Sasha?
Yeah, I think it's nice that like we're getting this density of like specifically green red based like 4 mana 4/4 hasty threats. Like there was the dinosaur from that recent set. This is another addition to that. I think Gruul monsters and like that style of Gruul Stompy is very, very good. I think it's probably the best aggro archetype in the format. And this is a card that like I'm quite happy to sleeve up and is definitely in the upper half of the card quality of all the cards we've been talking about.
Yeah, like I think this is I was underwhelmed by it looking at it at first, and my first thought was like, oh well, this doesn't make the cut in Gruul, but like I would play it in mono green Stompy or potentially Celestia Stompy, and so maybe it makes you make decisions on the kind of like mana crypt aggro decks you're playing. But I think you're right, and like maybe this is just like better than like Rampaging Raptor and some of those other 4 drops, especially with like double green generally being easier to obtain than double red. So yeah, this is definitely a card I'll be trying in Gruul. Probably not in Naya. Like I think your card quality there is just too high, but
Mhm.
I think it's definitely worth a shot in Taiga gamer decks for sure.
I mean, like the Raptor comparison, I think pretty apt. Like the double red is a factor. I think like sleeping on the ward is like worth like thinking about for sure. Because like how often like not that people really play Hellrider or Hero Box Sigil as much anymore. But even then, like those cards are so hard to move. So here we have 4 toughness and ward. So you can be like reasonably certain that at least your like hasty big dum dum is kind of like at least gonna get to attack. But having no sort of evasion definitely like puts it pretty low compared to say like territorial Hellkite or questing.
No, I think that's exactly right. So yeah, I will be pre-ordering 1 foil copy of this card. Next, we've got Sharp-Eyed Rookie, 1 and a green, notably a human. For vigilance, and whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, if its power is greater than Sharp-Eyed Rookie's power or its toughness is greater than Sharp-Eyed Rookie's toughness, put a 1/1 counter on Sharp-Eyed Rookie and investigate. This is a lot of text, and I think a lot of it is quite relevant, kind of in the same discussions that we were just having in terms of the deck or decks that this would potentially fit in. What do you think here, Spencer?
I mean, Nolki's playing Wildborn Preserver as our resident like Gruul lifer expert, and he's trying to convince me it's playable in other decks, including like Naya as well. And I just keep thinking that card's super bad on too. At least this one doesn't require like a mana input. I think this one might, if you're in the realm for another 2 drop in those decks, the problem with like cards like this one particularly is that a lot of like the green mid-range aggro decks are actually trying to jump curve if they're aggressive. So I think this one seems more like a green whitey kind of card to me, and usually as they prefer a hate bear. So then this seems like it's geared towards like the Gruul deck if you're gonna play it, and then there I'd say they have better 2 drops, they have stronger 3 drops, but it might be just nice for the density if you're trying to like lower your curve and be a bit more aggressive.
I definitely
Also, I need to point out one really important fact. The art on this is awful. I hate it. It looks so odd.
Yeah, it looks very like AI art generated
Yeah,
kind of thing.
yeah,
hmm Art aside, I do think this card has some applications in the counters deck specifically. That's a deck where you do want to jump the curve, but just because of your card quality and card density, you end up playing a lot of 2 drops. And this is a nice card for that deck. I'm have been investigating that archetype a lot more recently. I think it has some real legs, and this is just another add to the deck.
mm,
Yeah, I think like as someone who with albeit with not a ton of success, but a lot of 3 and 4 ones with Naya and Gruul this year, I would definitely play this card in both those decks and give it a shot. I think the 2 drop slot is obviously intentionally quite weak because you're trying to skip the curve. There's a lot of times where like leading aggressive 1 drop Ragavan, something like that, as opposed to your elf, like into this is a very strong start. And yeah, I'm excited to give this card a try. Finally, we've got a little something for the lands players who are always. I was gonna say, I think the lands deck has replaced mono black as the 1 card away deck, where there's always like 1 card that gets added in every set that's gonna really take it over the top, and then it's still like pretty unplayable. But we've got Undergrowth Recon, 1 and 2 green enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, return target land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. This card sucks. I'm sorry. It's terrible. I don't see any actual good applications for it. And I think we're definitely all on the same page here. Like,
If you're if you've registered Glacial Chasm, this is a card that enters at least your peripheral vision when you're building your deck. The real downside to it is that the speed that it happens, the fact that it's on your next upkeep and enters the battlefield tapped, is really what hampers this. If either of those things weren't true, I mean, obviously a different card, but it's at least something we can talk about a little bit more. But as it stands, like this is just a Glacial Chasm enabler, basically. The speed that it's actually going to accrue relevant value in every other lands archetype is just way too slow.
yeah, absolutely, Spencer. Where are you as someone who really,
I've,
loves putting a good land into play?
I've definitely played a lot of lands, and that deck has suffered the passage of time with the printing of initiative as well. And it seems like every set there's a card where I'm like, ooh, Conduit of Worlds, and then I'm like, oh, this isn't really what they need. They need more like exploration. Anyways, this is definitely not it. And but many lands players I saw get giddy with excitement in this card in multiple formats. So, and I
This
would
is
say that not it.
Yeah, this is gonna be a card that I like smile when someone casts it against me because I think I'm like gonna win automatically, and then they like Glacial Chasm lock me, and I'm upset.
Oh,
But
100%.
like I just think this card is like absolute do nothing. So a couple multicolor cards here. First one's No More Lies, a white and a blue for Mana Leak. But counter target spell unless its controller pays 3. If it's countered that way, exile it instead of putting it into the owner's graveyard. Obviously, that does have some applications in the format, and especially, with potentially cards with collect evidence being playable. Yeah, I think this is kind of pretty self-explanatory. I think if you're in the business of casting Mana Leak with white and blue mana in your deck, you're almost certainly including this. Spencer, what do you think?
Yeah, more functional reprint's good. Knock yourselves out with another mana leak.
Anything else to
Now,
add, Sasha? But
this card is good. Go play it in your deck. If you're playing Omniscitive, go slap it in there. Playing Jeskai Green, slap it in there. Playing Jeskai, slap it in there. We just need more redundancy on these effects. It's nice.
yeah,
And the
exactly.
XL, I mean, like as we've all seen too, like XL is super relevant, like with force of negation and stuff like that. So
Great. And then we have Gleaming Gear Drake, a blue and a red for a 1/1 artifact creature with flying, enters the battlefield, investigate. When you sack an artifact, put a 1/1 counter on Gleaming Gear Drake. Again, very archetype specific card, but one that is kind of interesting in those kind of artifact potential artifact aggro decks. Sasha, does this like fit in any of the decks you've been playing lately?
Yeah, like when I was talking about the specifically Grixis White artifact sack piles, this is a card that fits really well into that sort of archetype. It also again shows the weakness of it, where you need to put a lot of effort into making this card a like valuable threat on board. If you're under a lot of pressure, it means you're going to be a lot weaker to frankly aggressive decks. But it's a really nice addition. Like it synergizes really well with the welder piles. The fact that the artifact sack is on curve, it makes two artifacts as just a 2 mana thing, which is surprisingly valuable. Like in those kind of artifact sack shells, this is a great card for them. Uh, I don't think it's going to wildly redefine the archetype. It's just a nice pickup. Not all
Nice.
versions of the deck will want to play it. Some of them will, and this is a card that you okay with there.
Perfect. Anything to add, Spencer?
I think all the artifact players are huffing copium. They think this is playable. Go ahead. Moving on.
A couple big dumb dragons, commander staples here. We got Aurelia, the law above, 3 red, white, flying, vigilance, haste. Whenever a player attacks with 3 or more creatures, you draw a card. Whenever a player attacks with 5 or more creatures, Aurelia, the law above, deals 3 damage to each of your opponents, and you gain 3 life. 4/4. Uh, this card has a lot going on. Spencer, I think you're definitely more likely to cast this card than Sasha. So, what are your thoughts on it?
I mean, I play a lot of Boros. I feel in like aggressive creature decks, and I would never play this card. It's just like it has a lot of text, and the more you read it, you're like maybe, maybe, maybe. But at the end of the day, most of the 5 drops need to like close the game out immediately, and on an empty board, I'd say is the second part of that, or at least be able to affect it pretty hard. And I feel like this requires you to have such a wide board in that archetype that I'm just not in the market for a card like this.
Yep,
I think
that makes sense. What about you, Sasha?
I think if you're looking at this card and you're excited about this card, first of all, you should give another look to Swooping Pterodon from the weird dinosaur park secret lair, whatever
Yeah,
it was thing from
yeah.
Ixalan. That card is much closer to playable than this card is, and I don't think that one's a slam dunk in any deck either.
Or Theory Sun's Glory if you're gonna play a kind of like a
Yes.
hasty like
Hmm.
5 mana Boros guy.
Yeah. I think as someone who would definitely get eye rolled by Sasha for attempting to cast this card, this isn't quite even on my radar. I think if it was a human, I think it would be kind of interesting just as like a hit for Winota. But yeah, I don't think it's quite getting there, even though it does have a lot of text. Next, we've got Ansrag the Quake Mole, winning the award for strangest art in this set. We've got 2 red, green. Whenever Ansrag the Quake Mole becomes blocked, untap each creature you control. After this combat phase, there is an additional combat phase. 3 red, green. It must be blocked each combat this turn if able. Most notably here, 8/4 for 4 mana is kind of the headliner here, and definitely a card I will try in Cruel Stompy. But do you see other applications or just like a big dum dum in red green, Spencer?
This is the kind of card I would never really play. But it's the kind of card that I feel like I lose to when Stompy decks play them. So I don't know what to say about that.
Yeah, yeah, this card. So first of all, I want to say I do like this a lot more than a lot of other cards. It does have the problem where like the Gruul Stompy deck has this now quite good density at 4 mana. This is a card that fits into that. It has the downside that like it's tagged by sorcerer removal and punished by sorcerer removal a lot better than, or a lot, yeah, a lot better than any of the other 4 drops, just because it doesn't have locked in value in that haste attack. That being said, it punishes you a lot harder when it attacks that first time. And if this ever gets to the point of attacking twice, you've probably won the game. Like, definitely more of a high rolly card, but I would never slight somebody for including this in their green red deck or their Naya deck. I think it has a lot of value.
Yeah.
I'm gonna take a hard stance and really just disagree. I have been on a mission to convince people to play less 5 drops and less 4 drops, and I feel like this is like the opposite realm. This is just the like I know I'm gonna add another 4 drop to my Stompy, like another 5 drop. Uh, like it's like ooh, a combat celebrant and a big dum dum. So I don't know. I don't think I don't fault people for playing it. Like I said, I think it's the kind of thing I'll lose to. But it's just like uh, right now in the format, this is like a card that doesn't have haste and afford and no ETB, and I feel like it's really tough to justify that unless you have an enabling kind of card for it.
Yeah, I will flag that like I think sorcery speed removal tends to be a lot more common than instant speed right now. Um, it depends a lot on your meta. I think this is a 4 drop that goes into certain metas better than others, and there are some metas I would strongly encourage you to not play to not play this card and just play Haster. There are other ones where I'd much prefer this one. It's just part of that discussion.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
functional turn, which I think like is constantly going up and one down turn. Right now, I think the functional turn is lowering, so people are like that haven't adapted, like their decks are dirtily in playing cards like this right now. I think you're gonna like lose out, and then until everyone's trying to interact too early with like interaction, and then cards like this when the functional turn like is like that low, then people can play like these to go over the top of those mid-range decks or those like Hayfair decks. Then cards like this all of a sudden shine. Everyone's trying to play like mental misstep and stuff like that. Some slams this, and it looks like kind of foolish.
Got it. Well, I'll be casting this against Spencer on turn one off the Mana Crypt at a local event near you.
I'll lose to it for sure.
All right. Next, I think finally we've got Voja Jaws of the Conclave, a nice Naya card for Noel here. Got 2 red, green, white for a 5/5 Vigilance Trample Ward 3. And whenever it attacks, put X/1/1 counters on each creature you control, where X is the number of elves you control, and draw a card for each wolf you control. This is a lot of text and a lot of very good text, in my opinion. We'll let resident Naya head Spencer start us off here.
So I actually think this card is like probably the most playable gold card to me in a couple archetypes. And I don't think you necessarily have to be like an Elves Tribal Cradle based deck to be think it's quite good, but just like the old kind of Cradle decks in general that play like Priestess Titania, and have like other Elf synergy cards like Elvish Archdruid, typically play enough mana ramp Elves. They're always looking for their 5 drop. Myself and other Cradle players have been playing like Gargaroth on 5, Elder Gargaroth, just as like a big dum dum that has like draw cards, kind of like helps in the game, makes for guys. This one, because it has Ward 3, I think the fact that it doesn't have an ETB is acceptable. And I do think that it essentially ends the game. Not quite in the same way that like Trigger Behemoth does, but much more than like a Gargaroth or even a 5-mana Nissa, which take a couple turns to develop their kind of game ending advantage. Whereas this one, once you untap with it, and with Ward 3, I think that it's like you have a reasonable chance of being a 5/5. Like, maybe they have to get like a 4 mana essentially with art removal here. Um, if you have 2 or 3 elves out and you're attacking on this board, like notably it puts it on every creature, not just the elves. But if you ramp this out with 2 elves, everything is getting quite large, and this card has trample, and you're drawing at least one card. So I think this card's actually quite good.
Sasha, agree or disagree as someone who's going to get killed by this many, many times?
Yeah, I'll defer to the Elves Judgement dispenser. I'm willing to believe his analysis there. Um, I'm pretty mid on this card outside of that application. I thought about it in terms of a counters context. The fact that it's just like 5 mana 5/5 that doesn't attack the turn it comes to play, it does protect itself pretty well. That's also a deck that plays a certain number of elves anyways, just because it's a green aggro deck. This card does draw a card there. I'm just disinclined to include a 5 drop in those decks that's not named Verdurous Gearhulk. So
Yep.
kind of mid.
Makes. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, kind of mid on it in general, but again, I'm willing to believe it has applications in a like more elf cradle centric deck.
Yeah, I think I'll be definitely trying this in Naya. You like just like straight Naya even, and I'm hoping to like it. I think it's a pretty cool card.
Yeah, I think like even if you just like get it off 2 elves, like it becoming a 7/7, the elves like and every other creature in play, like getting +2/+2 counters, drawing a card, like pretty strong.
All right. So now we've got just a couple quick hitters from Multicolor that, could push some interesting archetypes towards more playable. First, we got Drag the Canal, 1 blue, 1 black, instant. Create a 2/2 white and blue detective creature token. If a creature died this turn, you gain 2 life, surveil 2, then investigate. I'm just going to let Spencer kind of touch on this one because I think he was interested in it. I'm not really sure what I think of this card.
I mean, the next couple cards are all just cards that I think were tough to evaluate, as whether or not I think are playable. Dragon Canal just does so much, and like there's a few times where cards like this have been printed, and I'm just really unsure of them. And then I think that sometimes people end up playing them. Making a 2/2 surveilling, gaining life, and like it's just doing 4 things in its speed for 2 CMC. And I think that whenever a card has that much things going on at instant speed, it's just it's really hard to evaluate. And yeah, I mean conditional, but still interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Next quick hitter here, we've got Carnage Interpreter, 1, and then hybrid red, black, red, black. When it enters the battlefield, discard your hand and investigate 4 times. And as long as you have 1 or fewer cards in your hand, Carnage Interpreter gets +2/+2 and has menace. Sasha, what kind of decks do you think this has interesting applications for?
Yeah, so we talked a lot about the different kinds of mono red decks that want to get Hellbent really fast. This is a card that gets you Hellbent instantly and allows you to draw cards at your own pace. When it comes down, it's effectively a 5/5 menace in that archetype. There might be honestly a shell for this that is red black playing discard and this thing. That archetype is not going to be especially competitive. I do wonder about its application in a more mono red context and how good it'll be. But I'd be willing to believe in combination with the number of tokens you create, maybe there's some like uh, medium artifact red shell. We've seen medium red conventionally have that density and that they get value from that density in things like Urza Saga. So I think this is a card that will see less play than it deserves. But a lot of that has to do with the fact that the archetypes that it's good in are just kind of mid. And I'm certainly not wildly excited to cast this card.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think the kind of coolest application of this would be in a like red deck looking to cast Shrapnel Blast and Galvanic Blast with some like artifact sub themes with Saga, and I think that's probably its best applications, and one that I think that's one that I will definitely try it in. But yeah, I think it's hard to evaluate. Obviously, discarding your hand is gonna rot in your hand some percentage of the time where you don't want to cast it. So that's definitely awkward.
Yeah, definitely a
And
speculative include.
yeah, exactly. And last, we've got another lands copium card, World Soul's Rage, X, red, green, sorcery, deals X damage to any target and put up to X land cards from your hand and or graveyard onto the battlefield tapped. I think this is going to read much better than it plays, personally. But Spencer, as a dad lands pilot, what do you think on this one?
This is another card that I'm kind of like, it's a bit hard to evaluate. Originally, I mean, like most of the cards so far, like we haven't really had too many that were like, oh yeah, that one's super good, staple slam. Like we're just like difficult to evaluate or difficult to place that archetype. I am, I'm. This is just one where I'm like a little bit of the explore, a little bit of the like restore. Neither of those cards sees a ton of play, but both sometimes see play in like the lands archetypes. This one's like a bit of like incidental value attached to it. I don't know. This is a card that I'm hesitant to say is trash and hard copium. So maybe I'm just like on it by thinking that it's like maybe gets played. But this is another card that I think like if it's like 50 cents, like I'll put it in my like little box of like maybes along with like Forgotten Caves and like other discard land spells like that.
Yeah,
I think this
absolutely.
I think this is a card that will see play and it will be a mistake whenever it does see play.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I think a bunch of lands players will put it in their decks and then it will come out a week or two later once they've had
Exactly.
enough time to like draw it potentially a couple times.
Speaking of mistakes,
Speaking of mistakes, we've got, as Spencer has affectionately dubbed these, the trash pile. We've got a Trada Deadly Fugitive, 1 blue black for a 1/4 death touch. Face down creatures you control have 2 blue black, turn this creature face up. If you can't, exile it. Then you may cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost. Whenever an assassin you control deals combat damage to an opponent, cloak the top card of that player's library. I'm not really sure why we would even talk about this card, so this is just
All right, all
I
right,
don't get it. So someone explain it to me. Why are we talking about this card?
all right. For the listeners at home, this is the Sasha Copium slide. Uh, So this is a card that I think is going to end up playing a lot better than it seems. Like in the kind, specifically, I'm thinking in a Grixis shell or a check pile shell. It accrues value really naturally and develops your board. It's really difficult to block, especially if you're representing blue and black mana. Just being able to tag something with removal and then using the death touch and the really big toughness to make sure that you trade positively. The other thing is you can just randomly high roll people. Like that turn it face up is kind of wild. You can do that in instant speed as well. Like this provides way more application than I think it initially presents. It's definitely a card where you want to go into a low resource game and you need to be able to shelve this card in a deck that is very good at controlling the board. And that's why specifically it's good in the kind of Grixis shell and check tempo style shells with a lot of removal, a lot of interaction, and this is a card that can just take over the game really quickly there. It kind of reminds me of, obviously this isn't a Grixis or check card, um, but Rafine, which is a card that has an awkward mana cost, but always overperforms in the archetypes that it's played. This has a similar vibe to me as that, and where the shell that it's good in is relatively narrow, but I think it will overperform in that particular shell.
Got it.
got it.
Wow, that was the good one of these
I'll
two.
lose to the mole god before I lose.
That was a classic. I ain't reading all that, but I'm happy or sad for you. Whatever applies moment.
Yeah.
All right,
Um,
I'll just take the next one. Uh,
all
this is
right.
a 3 mana, 1 red, 2 white, 4/3 flying lifelink legend. Ignore the rest of the words on that card. If that's a card that you're okay playing, great. I think it has some value in some specific metagames, especially if you're playing a Boros deck and you're going to fight against a lot of like green red monsters. This is a card that's very difficult to race, like the stat line and the fact it has lifelink and evasion and like above mana cost power, I think makes it certainly a consideration for that metagame. I'm not playing this in every Boros deck, but it's definitely something you should have on your radar for those kinds of shells. If you're looking at this and thinking, okay, I'm going to put it into my like Jeskai deck, go for something different.
Yeah, I think I would maybe be on board if this was red, red, white. I think red, white, white in most Boros decks is very tough, and I don't know. I don't think this is playable, but I could be wrong. And I know
Every
Spencer thinks it's trash because he's put it on the trash pile slide. All right, moving on. Artifacts? Sorry, maybe we'll revisit you down the line. There is no good artifacts in this set.
no.
Lands? We've got some interesting ones. I think, we got the duels and their type duels, which always kind of makes them at least fringe playable, having, the land types on them, and then having Surveil 1 attached to them as well. Um, but I don't know. I think if you're playing blue black mid range control kind of thing, I think you'd be in the market for a surveilled tool that you can fetch, but I don't think non blue ones are going to be playable at all. What do you think, Spencer?
I'll let Sash take this. I mean, I think that anytime they print these sorts of cards, I always think of escape shift implications, but that's pretty much it.
Yeah, like these are I've had a difficult time thinking about these for other formats as well. I've like the Temple Cycle, which was the original version of this that are untyped. They haven't been playable in our format for so long. So you really do have to be getting value out of those types. I also tend to be of the opinion that you'd rather just get a Triome opposed to getting these cards if you're looking for that tap land. The one application that I'm like genuinely excited for is the blue black one in the Doomsday Breach deck. Both
Hmm.
to have just like for reference, that's a deck that really does want to have both triple black to support your Doomsday, but also two islands in play because a critical part of its Doomsday stack often revolves around Gush, which means you need to have two islands on top of those triple black sources. So something like Undercity Sewers that fits both of those bills is really nice. The Surveil is also just nice to have in the context of a combo deck. Um, for the rest of them, like, yeah, the blue ones might say play in a fringe context. The rest of them, I don't think you should ever include in your deck.
Agreed. And that is Murders at Karlov Manor. We definitely went a bit long there, considering our general our general thought on the set was that it was kind of underwhelming for the format, which is, honestly okay with me from time to time. It can get a little overwhelming if we're getting, 30 slam dunk playables in a set, but we've got some couple interesting cards and a couple definitely cards that are going to boost existing tier 1 archetypes. You guys have any final thoughts on Karlov Manor?
Yeah.
Spencer?
Yeah, I mean, like I kind of agree with your kind of point that like it's nice to have like one of these underpowered sets. Like I'd say this is a bit of a yawn set. Um, like there's nothing in it that I was like, there's one or two cards that I'm kind of like, oh sweet, like I'm excited for that card. Um, and then because they go into an archetype that I like to play. And then there's a couple cards I'm like, huh, maybe this is worth experimenting with. So like, to me, there's like 5 to 7 cards like that I'll be like probably picking up, and like probably one of them that I'll play, maybe two of them that I'll probably play pretty consistently, which is not, I guess, bad for a set, but is not great. Um, but I'm also, I know we're on the bank of Modern Horizon 3, so I think it's good that we're not going to like shake anything up too super hard here, and I'm okay with that.
Mhm. It's nice that there's a bunch of cards that, I mean, we were talking about having these things that you think about when you're deck building, and you probably don't register these cards anytime soon, but you're still thinking about them. And this adds to that pile. It's nice to have the development of more redundancy in less successful archetypes, and I'm happy to see sets like this continue to build on that. But yeah, like honestly, none of these cards stand out to me. There's some additions to some tier one archetypes, and there's some very strong bones to throw to like kind of tier two archetypes in Arc Drew's Charm. But aside from that, yeah, it's a low powered set, and that's okay.
I think it's important to note like just like the toolbox thinking some of these cards like right on rate. Sometimes they don't seem playable, but like I do think that some of those cards like are worth evaluating as like, hey, like 2 or 3 years from now, this could be playable. Like how many archetypes over the years have like we've seen that essentially just needed like 5 to 10 more playable cards, and then once they received 10, and then received like another 4 or 5, all of a sudden they catapulted to being like, oh, like that archetype's like a real archetype, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah,
One
absolutely.
mono black just needs one more card, right? One more
Just
card.
one more. Just one more terror. One more go for the throat.
I promise lands mid range will be playable again.
Oh, my heart.
All right, so we are gonna just very quickly, where this is gonna kind of be a recurring theme on our podcast here, is we're just gonna take a quick look at what decks have been winning, both maybe locally and maybe touch a little bit on some of the Discord events. So I'm gonna just hand it over to Spencer to just kind of highlight some of these cool decks and decks that have been taking down the format in the last couple weeks.
I think the points changes for this new season have people kind of excited to brew again, which makes pretty awesome. One thing I have noticed is there's been a lot of dual color within like the Candler Winter archive, which has like a bunch of local medals, including like Iowa and Portland, are and then as well as the Discord and async ones. But medium red, Rakdos, Gruul, Boros, there's been some time vaults. There has been some Jeskai and Academy combos. But there's been some random stuff like even a Cradle Hoof and a Pattern Rector. And I think what it's showing is that like people are excited to brew, and people are exploring like the dual wedge combos, but also like kind of like a little bit being the fun police with those because most of those are like either aggressive or hate bear or blood moon decks. So pretty much stopping all the chess guy or 4-color players or people trying to like have fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a great result of what you two and the rest of the council have done in the last couple changes. Is it has made, there's deck building decisions to be made in terms of 2 versus 3 versus 4 colors, and I think the more that we get on that, the more success these 2-color decks are going to be able to have, which I think is a really good side plot from the changes. Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah. Go ahead,
yeah.
Sasha. As a
So
winner this month, you get
yeah,
to
so
take it down.
I may have two deck lists on this list, but I've also only played in two tournaments. Uh since the beginning of the calendar year. Your boy's been applying for grad schools, so yeah. Notably, we've had some goblins doing well. Tim took down two Highlanders with his goblins deck. It's a good example of an aggressive goblins shell that can really punish decks that are really trying to dirtle. We also had Null take down an event with Kiki pod combo that's basically hybridized the Kiki pod deck with the Seeker Walk deck. That seemed to be quite successful. Yeah, and some other outliers. Doomsday Breach is still a good deck. The Cyberdrive Cafe deck, which is kind of the black base Bant shell in the artifact midrange space I talked about, still quite good. Time Vault one with Evan Pepper using a Counselor Evan Pepper with an interesting counterspell suite to complement it. Uh, as well as a second place from Jeskai and a second place from Greg Van Horn on RDW.
Perfect.
What one deck list, I mean, obviously Cyber Cafe is like an interesting deck, but just because recently, because the points changes, there was a lot of hesitancy towards point changes. Much discussion in the Discord. Kiki Walk versus Seeker Walk versus Kiki Walk. Where do you guys sit on that?
Like the name?
No, like the archetype, because previously there was like much discussion that like Seeker Walk was like a tier one deck. It's still a very heavily played archetype in some other metas and like performs quite well. As is also Kiki Pod. Um, but just like, do you think which one do you think will stand up on top? Do you think it'll be the hybridized version, or do you think it'll be a solo version? And like, why do you think that?
I think it'll probably honestly, it's very pilot skill level dependent. I think, like, I think, having Noel pick up Kiki Pod this week, like, is, he's always going to do well with a deck like that. And, or if someone, either of you two, especially like Spencer, as like a creature combo aficionado. Um, in my opinion, like, I'm terrified of Seeker Walk. Like, I always have been. I have not had a very good record against it, and like constantly make mistakes just because of the like inevitability, or just never wanting to tap out even if it like really advances my game state. And whereas like I feel like the Kiki combo can be harder to, hides the wrong word, but you know what I mean. Like, you can't just kind of win with it out of nowhere a lot of the time. You're kind of setting it up more. So I think probably that the best list will land in the like hybrid zone that Noel's kind of landed on here. I think that was a pretty clean list, and one that he'll probably keep developing as the year goes on.
Hmm. I definitely lean more on the side of Seeker Walk of those two. I've always felt like the key component of the deck is quite weak, honestly. I've always felt like um, it punished some bad decision making from players, both in terms of the fact that you telegraph a lot of your setup. Like I think Null's deck also doesn't play like straight up Splinter Twin, which used to be a mainstay of the archetype. Um, yeah, like uh, the thing that's really powerful about including the Kiki pod or the Kiki component in a pod deck is if you can resolve Pod, you're pretty much guaranteed to be able to kill the next turn. If you don't live in a world where that's happening consistently, then I think Seeker Walk is just better. So like I tend to favor Seeker between the two, but I can understand certainly how Noel has done well with it, and I think it's a reasonable choice either way. It's definitely close to like two of one, half a dozen of the other.
I worked a bit with Noel in this hybridized version, and I think during those discussions, like a lot of the time, we just came back to like the Kiki combo part of the deck is the anemic part, like it's the trash cards for sure. Um, but it does give you some more inevitability and like it gives you more of an oops win button, which the deck already kind of has a little bit of. Um, I do think that like although I think the hybridized version is good in a meta where maybe you're facing a bit more hate or some maybe some like more mid-range decks and you're just trying to like go really hard on the combo, that I think the Seeker Walk version is probably gonna like win out either the black version for like if you're in a more combo based meta, or the Omnath version if you're in more of a mid-range battle meta. But I could be wrong, or an aggressive meta like there currently is. Then, but I could be wrong.
Perfect. Sorry, is this on Mox Field, Spencer?
Yeah, the Victoria Candler winners one's on Mox Field, which is our kind of like local meta one, so everyone can see the deck list and who wins it. And then the Canada Winners Archive is a Discord member. I believe it's Cyclops maintains it. So that must be a tall order to keep track of all those deck lists for all those metas. So props to that person. No, it's been a good way to kind of keep track of data, see like deck lists from different areas, see different people's pet cards as there is many of them, and yeah, just kind of see the general trends. And you know, I suggest everyone like goes to Moxfield. I'm not trying to like plug them super hard, but I personally like the way that the deck lists read on Mox Field. Like you can adjust your layout. Some people like lists. Some people like to see all the pictures of all the cards. Some people like to sort them different ways. You can also like play out the deck lists on it. So you can like basically have like a cockatrice sub browser. So I've enjoyed like because I can click on it and like play a bunch of sample hands, play the first 5 turns. So
Totally. No, I like Mox Field a lot. That's where I've been building for a while now.
well, I mean, on the horizon we have the year-end top 8 for 2023. Two of your boys here on it. Tyler almost squeaked in there. It was close.
Well, let's not oversell it. But I did lose 9 finals this year, so I did, I
Final
guess,
boss.
almost make it in terms of losing 9 times in the finals and only getting one win. So
Mm-hmm. You were the final boss for many of the events.
yeah, no, I'm not salty about it at all. It's totally fine.
Shooting for those averages.
Yeah, so I think next time we're hoping to maybe discuss a little bit the top 8. If we can get together before that happens. I know Sash and I are probably working on decks. You know that me and Noel, creature father, have been going back and forth, basically talking to each other into playing Naya, basically. I'd love if you guys are wondering what our chat is like. It's just like Boros, TNT, green white, red green, Naya. Why are we just Naya? Put these decks together, they form Naya. It's like me. It's like a meme itself. So
Yeah,
I
but
just
hopefully we don't.
imagine any chat with Noel just involves him just typing Flint to 4 question mark into the chat and hitting enter as many times as he can.
What a legend. Most wins this season. I can't remember if it was mostly on Grill or Naya, but definitely those two guys.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think he had more wins on Nine. Yeah, he surprised. He got a couple, like he got one with Blue Black. He got one with Esper. He was a gamer this year.
showing his range.
Player of the year for sure.
Mm. But yeah, we'll definitely be hopefully in the next episode talking through me and Spencer's deck building choices and decision making around the top 8, and just more generally how to orient yourself when trying to build against a certain metagame.
Perfect. Well, I think that kind of wraps us up for today. I will say, obviously, we're still brand new, but I'm going to get socials up and running for us probably by the next episode. So we'll be sure to plug those and eventually probably take some questions from Discord and Twitter and everything and incorporate them. So stay tuned and I'll let you know what those are next time. But for Council's Judgment, I'm Tyler Woolley and I'm signing off.